Welcome to Developing Occupational Health and Safety Professional in British Columbia's manufacturing sector. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yusra Benjeloun, Administrative Coordinator and Project Manager with the Work Wellness and Disability Prevention Institute, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. This webinar is made possible through the support of the Community Gaming Grant Program through the BC government, as well as donations and memberships to WWDPI. We thank our program partners, Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, Education Advisory Committee, and speakers who contribute to this webinar series. While we're waiting for others to join us, I'll go over a few technical points for the webinar. You should be able to hear the presentation through your computer speakers or through the conference call line if you dialed in. Please use the question box to submit any issues you may be experiencing and to ask any questions you have related to the presentation. We will collect questions submitted throughout the presentation and follow the presentation with the Q&A based on the questions submitted. The presentation will be recorded and posted for free on our website within a week, along with the slides. You will be emailed the direct links for all of these items when they're available. Today's webinar will be presented by Dr. Graham Lowe and Lisa McGuire. Graham Lowe has over 30 years of organizational, labor market, and policy consulting experience across Canada and internationally. He is president of the Graham Lowe Group Incorporated, a workplace consulting and research firm, and a professor emeritus at the University of Alberta. Graham is the author of several books, including Creating Healthy Organizations, How Vibrant Workplaces Inspire Employees to Achieve Sustainable Success. Second revised edition to be published in early 2020. His latest book with Frank Graves is entitled Redesigning Work, a Blueprint for Canada's Future Wellbeing and Prosperity. Graham has given hundreds of conference talks and workshops across Canada and internationally. Graham has contributed many articles to practitioner publications and the media, including the Globe and Mail, Policy Options, HR Professional, Health and Productivity Management, and Healthcare Quarterly. Lisa McGuire is the Chief Executive Officer and Board Director of the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of British Columbia. As a certified health and safety professional, she garnered industry support to establish the organization in 2007 and appointed inaugural CEO. Under Lisa's leadership, the organization more than doubled membership to 2,400 while growing a multi-layer infrastructure under a 14-director policy board. The manufacturing industry is currently leading injury rate reduction in BC compared to all other sectors utilizing the most current statistical data available. Accomplishments led by the Manufacturing Safety Alliance include being the organizational founder of the BC Safety Charter, transitioning as the Executive Health and Safety Council of BC in 2020, leading the development of a national health and safety audit standard, and working to establish a national health and safety professional certification program in manufacturing. Graham and Lisa, welcome. We're honored you'll be presenting our webinar today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Yusra, and WWDPI for providing us the opportunity to share this important work in the manufacturing sector. I'll be talking about 4 key areas today to lead the discussion, and really starting with the steps our industry has taken to create healthy and safe workplaces, which is very important, and the research that was conducted to help support a key outcome, which is standardizing the OHS profession, which is Occupational Health and Safety for manufacturing, and really looking at the effective core competencies and capabilities to support their success. And then we'll proceed with a value proposition for health and safety professionals in manufacturing, and then talk about the strategy that was developed in consultation with a steering committee and industry partners to support a sustainable education and training program for health and safety professionals in manufacturing. So really to start with some context of the importance of creating a culture of health, safety, and well-being, really important. And again, the Canadian perspective, so really understanding, what the workforce and the employees within that, what is their perspective on health, safety, and well-being, and in terms of selecting employment and staying within the employer groups. So the purpose of a survey was conducted earlier this year, really to raise awareness for the importance of workplace safety in hiring and retention, really to help more employees recognize its importance in the long-term sustainability of their businesses. So, we moved forward a couple of questions and included them in an Angus Reid survey, asking working employees whether workplace health, safety, and mental well-being was important to them. And of 1,000 working Canadians polled, 94% said yes, absolutely. It's an important part of where they select and where they work. And looking at the segmentation from that, with females compared to males, there was a slightly different percentile. 97% in terms of from a female perspective said absolutely, it's critically important, and from a male perspective, it was 91%. We also did segmentation based on age, and being 3% more important for the 18 to 35-year-old category compared to individuals over 35. So in terms of being important, absolutely, it was. We showed through that survey that it was important. When we asked the second question, asking whether decisions made in their workplace consider employee health, safety, and well-being, all or some of the time, only 77% of these demographics said yes. So knowing that there's work to be done in this area and the importance of that work, our goal as a not-for-profit society, the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC, is to achieve cultural change that ensures safe workplaces for all BC manufacturing workers. So knowing that having a resource available to industry to support that success is important to Canadians, is important to manufacturers, and we really wanted to ensure that we were successful in moving forward a strategy. Our organization helps the manufacturing community in British Columbia by doing a number of things. We offer events to provide information, education on occupational health and safety. We deliver training sessions, both specialty type courses as well as general health and safety courses. We provide advisory consultation on site to manufacturers, and we develop resources. We also deliver and disseminate a magazine 4 times a year and offer online training through our website. So different ways that we provide outreach to the manufacturing community to help support our vision. As we have increased the health and safety knowledge in the manufacturing sector, we've seen an increase in the demand for health and safety positions and the roles within organizations with the right skills and competencies to support manufacturing employers. So recognizing that this is, the theme that we had seen in our work and outreach with our membership, we wanted to work through a research-based solution to really understand more about why there wasn't an effective resource to support industry. So recognizing from a high level there was inconsistencies in terms of the health and safety curriculum across the different academic institutions regarding the profession. And we were finding, certainly in the work and advisory work in connecting with our membership, a shortage of qualified health and safety professionals with and without experience, with a very limited practical component that we had found in our conversations and discussions with these key demographics as we performed outreach with our membership in British Columbia. So recognizing that, certainly and an opportunity to learn more about how we could change this particular challenge, we were provided the opportunity through the ministry, the BC Ministry and the government, through a program called the Sector Labour Market Partnership Program. And really there were, at the time, there were 5 different phases to help us support a solution on this. With the first of those phases really bringing together a steering committee or a group of advisors and different stakeholders to establish a clear understanding of what goals we were going to be proceeding to help solve this challenge, And then with that, some terms of governance to ensure that we had a mechanism to be able to support decisions. And with that, the second phase really looked at how do we deepen our understanding of the issue or the potential challenge, and with that, doing a labor market research study to help us understand more. The third phase then really looked at, and then from the research, how do we effectively define a strategy to support a clear path forward, and then of course implementation and sector-led evaluation. So the first phase, as I mentioned, really looking at establishing a steering committee with governance and defining the problem really clearly, because we wanted to really understand the scope of the challenge that our industry is facing. With a steering committee advisory board of really a number of key individuals that help support a really broad and diverse collective, was critical and important to be part of the conversation in shaping direction. Now, I will say that the steering committee is included within all phases of the project. So really important for continuity and being able to, from the very beginning, knowing where we're going and how to support feedback and contribution throughout each of these phases. So in terms of phase two, the labor research was the next step in helping us understand what the details were in collecting research to be successful. And Dr. Graham Lowe will be delivering this particular segment of the webinar.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Yusra, for introducing us and for getting things off to a good start. It's really my pleasure to provide you with a brief overview of the labor market information component of this very important project that the MSABC has undertaken. The first thing I want to emphasize, and this picks up on one of Lisa's key points, is that this entire project is really guided by key industry stakeholders. And in phase one of the project, there was a very strong consensus for the need to conduct in-depth labor market information research. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about now briefly. The purpose of the labor market information research was to really tap into all relevant sources of information on occupational health and safety professionals and occupational health and safety practices in the manufacturing sector. So we looked at all kinds of statistical data from Statistics Canada, the Government of BC, and other sources. I also reviewed extensively the academic and gray literatures on all relevant OHS topics. We conducted a survey of 322 manufacturing firms that actually gave us some new and very relevant insights for this project that I'll get to momentarily. And the final thing we did was conduct key informant interviews. And all of this, when rolled together, resulted in a very detailed research report. You can see a little picture of it on the slide here that you can download from the MSABC website. And I would encourage you to do so because it gives you all of the background information and goes into all of the various data sources that we use. To really give you a quick profile of the sector, and I know Lisa's briefly touched on this, but it's important to note the key role the manufacturing plays in the BC economy, close to $18 billion in revenues in 2018. It employs basically 174,000 or more workers, about 7% of the provincial workforce, and its future success, sustainable success, depends on being able to meet a range of significant economic, technological, workforce, and regulatory challenges. All of these challenges pose occupational health and safety risks, and this was very clear to the steering committee. So what we agreed was that manufacturers really had to be positioned to acquire the expertise and the resources that they needed, not only to address these big issues that were going to be coming at them, but also to be able to respond to any of the occupational health and safety challenges that these issues were going to be presenting. And this was all done in the context of the recognition that already BC manufacturers have a relatively high injury rate compared to other industries in the province, and that there needed to be more effort made to try to bring down these injury rates. So the project goals for phase 2 was to conduct the consultations and to really delve into the most relevant information that would help to identify the kinds of expertise that BC manufacturers would require over the next 5 to 10 years to make their workplaces safer and healthier. So the kinds of, just summarizing some of the key things that manufacturers had to address in order to do this included, we knew from the research that there would be increased competition for occupational health and safety professionals. We also knew that workforce demographics were changing, something that Lisa alluded to, that occupational health and safety standards were increasing. For example, now the whole issue of making workplaces psychologically healthy and safe has become front and center for employers right across the country. That's new. And we were also well aware that there were limitations to the available occupational health and safety education and training available, and that the competencies needed for manufacturers to have people who were able to really successfully address occupational health and safety really needed to be clearly defined. So these were some of the issues that we were going to be addressing in this labor market research study component of the project. So we looked at the demographics of the manufacturing workforce, and it became quickly very clear that as firms grew, they were going to be faced with increased demands to train and orient new workers on safe practices. At the same time, they were dealing with an aging workforce, and that among those older workers were those individuals who had the most expertise when it came to OH&S, and so there needed to be a way to transfer that knowledge to the newer people coming into the workforce. There was also the expectation that the workforce was going to become far more diverse, more women, more recent immigrants, more First Nations members, and that this diversity likely was going to require new approaches to OHS training. So the implications when we did the survey for these changing demographics was that 20% of the survey respondents basically believed that they could benefit and their employees could benefit from occupational health and safety training in a language other than English. And this is a very important, very relevant piece of information for planning future OH&S training. There was also, secondly, the recognition that automation, while coming at the manufacturing employers quite quickly, basically was double-edged. And one of those edges was that it could actually provide the potential for improving safety, because the automated systems could obviously alert people to safety risks. New machinery that was automated came with much more extensive health and safety guidelines for how to use the equipment and so on. And the third point that came up in terms of demographics was that the presence of unions in a workplace definitely could contribute to improved occupational health and safety. Their contributions, especially to health and safety joint committees, was recognized by employers. So what about the OHS competencies, training and education required? Well, here's where we really get to the core of the phase 2 research. it became very clear that there was absolutely no consensus on the skills and knowledge and professional designations or credentials required to be an OHS professional in Canada, never mind in the manufacturing sector. And I should just add as a sidebar here, this research that we did looking into OHS professionals and competencies and training and so on was a piece of research that really had not been done before, maybe with one or two exceptions in the United States, which shows really how important it is to look at these kinds of issues. We were really sort of venturing into new territory in terms of trying to document this information. And we discovered that while doing this, that there is in fact an international trend toward the standardization of a higher level of OHS credentials and requisite education skills and knowledge. And that as part of this international trend, one of the leading certifications for OHS in Canada, the Canadian Registered Safety Professionals Board, had actually increased their, or planning to increase their educational requirements as we were conducting the research, and actually did so back in 2018. And the other key point here is that the survey and the focus groups we conducted identified key competencies for OHS professionals in manufacturing that went way beyond just technical OHS skills. It included soft skills like leadership, communication, teamwork, organizational skills, a real awareness of ethical standards, critical thinking. You can see it listed here. So these were considered to be as important as basic OH&S skills for manufacturing health and safety. So looking at what kinds of training currently is available in Canada and in BC, we did look at this quite carefully. And we discovered that most of the OHS programs in Canada are certificate and diploma programs, which is interesting because in the United States, most of the programs are actually degree programs, but this is the state of play in Canada. And furthermore, that these programs are geared to adult learners, which does provide some advantages because it means that people can basically enroll in these while they are currently in the workforce. We also discovered that there are just over 1,300 individuals in BC with one of 6 recognized OHS certifications. And that this really constituted the pool of qualified people, at least qualified in terms of having acquired one of these certifications or diplomas. We also discovered that in manufacturing, a very common path into an OHS professional position was through a mid-career move, and that often the individuals doing this had no prior occupational health and safety formal training or education, that they were acquiring it along the way. So that's kind of interesting in terms of what the survey revealed. And as I've already alluded to, employers in manufacturing really do prefer people in occupational health and safety positions who have a blend of relevant work experience, skills that I listed in the previous slide, and an OHS education. So let's look at some of the survey results that really kind of give you a glimpse at the kinds of activities and support provided by occupational health and safety professionals. Now, I'm not going to go over this in detail, but I just want to point out that there are a lot of important contributions that the vast majority of people in those positions were doing, right, ranging from developing and implementing occupational health and safety management systems, including hazard control, identification, and so on, training, policy development, basically fostering a safety culture and related programs. It's also interesting if you look at the bottom that while psychological health and safety has become of increasing concern, it's a new thing, and yet among these manufacturers, close to half were actually addressing that issue. And the survey, remember, was done 2 years ago. So I think that that's also a positive to note. Moving to the next slide here, this gives you a breakdown by firm size, recognizing that half of the companies in manufacturing basically fall under 100 employees. So they're kind of in the small category in terms of their size. And you can see the size differences in terms of the kinds of recruitment, development, and retention practices that these firms have. With large firms, they're captured in the blue bar. The vast majority of them have a full-time OHS or part-time OHS person, compared to just 29% of small firms. If we go down to some of the points at the bottom of the slide, training and recruitment plans, again, the larger firms are more likely to be expecting to be doing that, and that to us is an important recognition, because any future health and safety training and education needs to be geared to employers in particular who are not large corporations. So moving to the next slide, this is very interesting, because if you look at the kinds of certifications that workers in these firms we surveyed possessed, just over half had none. They had kind of picked up OHS knowledge along the way. They learned on the job. Others had helped them acquire OHS knowledge, and yet they were basically without any formal qualification. The most common qualification was the CRSP, followed by the Construction Safety Officer and National Construction Officer. Now, the reason for this is because this survey was conducted during the downturn in the oil patch in Alberta, and especially in the northern part of the province, quite a few people from the oil and gas sector had moved into OHS positions in BC with the qualifications that were relevant for construction in oil and gas. It's a very common certification. Now, you'll note that 11% didn't know. That's because the people answering the survey that we conducted, many of them were in HR management positions. And if they were in large firms, they may not have known what specific credentials their OHS people had. So that explains that. So that kind of gives you the overview of the kinds of credentials that existed. So what about supply and demand projections? Looking at OHS professionals in BC, we know that the demand for these professionals will be growing. We also know that the projections for OHS professionals that the British Columbia government had done in its kind of labor market projection modeling really fit the kinds of evidence we were picking up in our research in the labor market research done for phase 2. It's interesting to note that the British Columbia 2025 labor market outlook labeled OHS relevant jobs as a top opportunity occupation, with quite a few new openings happening. So this is kind of the firmest evidence we have that yes, there are going to be more openings and more demand for this type of credential and professional. We also noted that the OHS programs that exist at places like BCIT and other post-secondary institutions should, in their current formulation, be able to provide an adequate supply of OHS people for at least the next few years. So the way that manufacturers could increase or meet increasing demand for OHS professionals was either external, by recruiting people who were coming on stream as newly qualified OHS professionals, or who are working in other industries, or, as I mentioned, out of Alberta, or they could internally develop OHS expertise. Now, this is an important potential strategy because remember that I mentioned that half of the companies that we surveyed had people who had moved into OHS positions from other positions within the company. So what about company safety practices? We were able to document what the practices were, and we're actually impressed at the range of practices that were really identified in research literature as being the most effective practices. And this slide compares those organizations responding to the survey who said that they had experienced recently improved safety performance. They're the blue line with the red bar, which were those who said that they had not experienced any improvement, or actually their safety performance had gotten worse. So this really confirms the importance of what essentially is considered OHS best practices. That would include training, having a full-time OHS or part-time OHS position, using an OHS management system, some kind of certificate of recognition for their health and safety management system. That included the Occupational Safety Standard of Excellence that's offered by the MSABC, or an ISO or an OHSA certification. So these are really promising practices that we know, based on the survey, lead to improved safety performance. So what about the value proposition for OHS professionals in manufacturing? What this really gets at is the business case for investing in occupational health and safety. And the value proposition is something that really hasn't received much attention in the research, but basically it comes down to the obvious, which is reducing injury rates and costs. That provides the strongest business case. And we've got some opportunity here, big opportunity, I think, in phase 3 and 4 of the project to really amplify the value proposition. And what will happen in subsequent phases is that the OHS profession in manufacturing will define its core competencies and skills, and how these will contribute to the sustainable success of their businesses. So the big outcome from phase 2, the labor market research that I've just described, is that there are, and this is a quote from the one of the focus group participants that's in the final report. The quote is that there are too many safety designations and no standards. And so what phase 3 is aiming to do is basically to try to address this and to fill the need for a relevant safety designation with the appropriate standards. So now I'm going to pass things over to Lisa, and she will describe to you what is currently happening in phase 3 of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I appreciate the introduction to the last, especially in terms of the last quote that was delivered, because really the strategy is all about solving that, and really, again, really complex. It's not simple. And it took a long time for the steering committee, together with validation from consultations, what direction needed to proceed to be successful. So I'm going to talk about now the strategy in that. And so as Graham mentioned, develop a standard for an occupational health and safety professional, looking at the manufacturing industry, with the goal of recognizing that the more work we do in helping support industry, and especially around the value of having a resource to support industry, that there will be shortcomings in the future of having enough qualified health and safety professionals in the BC manufacturing industry and nationwide. So I will also say that in the third phase, we did a lot of work in discussing with partners outside of our province, so my counterparts across Canada, because this challenge is the same. And when you look at the published document that Graham referred to, there certainly is on the strategy as well, and it recognizes their contribution. We also had, consultations either over the phone or on site in one occasion to be able to look at an international lens of what is others doing around this. So that the solution being to develop an accreditation and certification program for the health and safety profession working in the manufacturing sector. So a really important, and over the course of the duration of this phase, ensured that we had validation through consultations in addition to the steering committee, but really looking at 2 focus groups that were conducted and really getting and garnering information so that we were successful at putting together a strategy that we would see a successful outcome. So when we look at the strategic plan that was shaped, 4 key areas, but 3 essential in terms of actions moving forward. First of all, looking at a competency and capability framework. What skills and competencies would those individuals working in the manufacturing sector need to have, and what type of accreditation structure to ensure standards are delivered to meet those competencies and capabilities, and then what process around certification to ensure that there's oversight and continual improvement and maintenance of education in these areas, with a very strong communication and outreach throughout each of these quadrants, really being important. So we reflected upon external forces like legislation. We know that changes happen through regulation and emerging technology, especially in the manufacturing industry, where highly technical processes are coming into practice, and do we have the skills and competencies to address the emerging risks and hazards that they bring with them, and to ensure that we effectively control them as really being important for the emerging certified professional to ensure that they kept up to speed on these emerging changes with technology. And then looking at safety culture is really being critically important to influence and influence behaviors in the workplace that are positive to support a successful health and safety management system, and having the right practices, with these emerging, changing workforce dynamics happening that Graham alluded to. So all of these key pieces were really forensically reviewed, together with the committee and consultations with the focus groups to support a successful strategy outcome. And with that, each of those strategies worked through the definition and validation of vision and principles, what is the core outcome of each of those strategic areas, and really to validate each of those areas, what needs to occur, and then define and validate the goals to address each of those areas with action items, and then really putting together a sustainability plan to support its success. The strategy was developed to provide an advisory or a committee for each of these core areas to ensure that consultation happened at different levels within each of those specialty areas, and again with industry and expert consultations part of that. So a very important framework to be able to deliver on a very broad but important outcome of standardizing the health and safety profession for the manufacturing industry lens, and with that ensuring that each of these components were defined for each of those strategic processes. So with that, again, a comprehensive plan was put together, and I will say, again, it's available on the website because it is an 80-page document. It goes through each of those particular tasks to be able to support success. And then we looked at a sustainability plan because, really critical to ensure that there's continual improvement built into this, and that it is successful for the industry to address the areas that were identified as being really important to have a successful solution. So looking at having research on sustainability and governance, in each of those key areas with each of those core strategies, a competency advisor group, an accreditation advisory group, and a certification advisory group, each with providing input on the design. For the competency advisor group, looking at input on design of the competency framework with advice on the program sustainability. And again, the accreditation advisory group looking at the training and accreditation model to ensure that there is advice on the sustainability mechanism. With the certification advisory group, really input on the design of the certification model with advice on program sustainability, because ultimately ensuring that the industry would recruit these individuals with the right skills to be able to support their organization being successful at shaping and developing a culture that drives change in supporting really effective health and safety practices in the workplace. And with that, a very strong communications and outreach to inform, and which is why there was an entire strategy built around the communication network, because each of these strategies being critical to informing and collecting information from industry, so that each stage had that validation approach. That was deliberated on quite extensively at the steering committee level, as well as included in discussions with the focus groups to support a very effective model and outcome for this particular challenge that industry is facing. So what next? And that is critical to support all the work that has been done is implementation. The plan really shapes a very comprehensive approach to solving this challenge for industry. And with that, looking at ways to be able to move this forward. So we're in discussions with government on this right now, on how do we move this forward. And we expect it will look like pieces to move this forward, because it is a very big project, but ultimately a very important one, both, certainly for the industry. We know it's going to have impact across Canada, and with consultation with our industry, my counterparts across Canada are involved in the consultation as well, because of the importance of this initiative and the implications of an effective outcome to support manufacturing across Canada. I'll now invite Yusra to move forward with next steps.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this great presentation. So immediately we'll start our Q&A session. So to our attendees, if you have any questions, please insert them in the question box. So we already have our first question, which is, for the slide showing credentials, did you look at professionals with a diploma, for example, 2 years of full-time training, but don't have a specific credential that is listed?
The answer, it's Graham. The answer to that is no, we didn't, because the focus in the labor market research was to look at the types of occupational health and safety specific credentials. But I can say from the 5 focus groups, regional focus groups we conducted, it's clear that people in OHS roles had a wide range of other post-secondary education, particular apprenticeships, completed apprenticeships. So while we didn't look at it, we do know that there is a range. And I think Lisa may want to comment, because I know that the CRSP qualifications have been ramped up, and as I remember, they are now expecting someone who goes through the CRSP to have a post-secondary degree. Is that correct, Lisa?
Yeah, certainly there has been changes in that, and I would like to just mention in the strategy, discussions, we included a particular task areas to be able to map. Those that are currently qualified, what would that mean? What potential gaps would exist? Because, if there, what that would look like, because the competencies and capability framework wasn't or isn't completed right now as it relates to this project. but making sure that there was an item or task item within this strategy to be able to map, the current, all of the current degrees and certificates and programs out there of where that would fit in being, an effective outcome to achieve success in terms of certification.
Thank you both. Next question is, first, there is a positive feedback, so great information today. Thank you. And then the rest of the question is, has there been any research on the experience or qualifications held by those who investigate accident and incident and psychological health safety matters?
The answer is no. And I can say that with some confidence because I've just completed the revised second edition of my book, Creating Healthy Organizations, and I've looked extensively at this area. And the focus on the research now seems to be looking at the usefulness of various methods and models and standards that are available around the world to promote workplaces that are psychologically healthy and safe, and how to go about actually implementing those frameworks or models. And it hasn't got to the point of asking who in terms of qualifications, which is an important question, who's actually doing this. And of course, I think that would vary by organization. I mean, if you look in an industry like healthcare, you can expect pretty much anybody involved is going to have some kind of health professional education and training. In manufacturing, it's going to be much wider. People who, as I mentioned, have a real diversity of educational and work experience backgrounds. But it is an important question, and I think we will be getting to it sometime in the next couple of years.
Thank you, Graham. Third question is, were post-secondary institutions that provide OHS education, diploma, and certificates a part of the steering committee or the 5 local focus groups?
Lisa?
Well, in terms of, you're looking at who was consulted, or just maybe, looking at what, are you looking at whether they were included in the research for the labor sector market research? We had BCIT was part of the steering committee on the screen on the slide. In addition to the Kwajalein Polytechnic University, I think was the second representative. So we did have 2 educational institution representatives in terms of the steering committee, but certainly not any more than the 2.
And then on the second point about participation of representatives of these post-secondary programs in the research, the answer is yes, that we reached out to representatives of all of the BC post-secondary programs in occupational health and safety and some outside of BC, and we're able to talk to people who are knowledgeable about these programs and find out what their plans are for expansion or changing the programs. So there was a lot of input from people who basically run these programs.
Thank you. And the next question is there a time frame for phases 3 and 4?
So phase 3 was the strategic preparation and development, and that is complete. The full-fledged report is available on our website, and I can certainly provide the link after the webinar. In terms of phase 4, we're really prepared to move it forward earlier this year, but right now resources are constraining moving it forward, and we're working with government right now to look at how can we do this, because the plan that was comprised was around 4.5 years to be successful in defining and developing a core competencies framework, and then moving into an accreditation model with a certification program. All of that is certainly a lot of work, but that is really what the strategy was all about developing. And we're in consultation right now to see how we can move this forward. as quickly as possible, but accessing, resources to be able to do that. And that's really where we are right now, is in discussions and deliberations with the BC government.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And then next question is, can you summarize the steps that employers have taken in order to create healthy and safe manufacturing workplaces?
So when we talk about the steps, industry is doing a lot of things. One of the key areas that we're helping industry do is build an effective health and safety management system to a standard, which for manufacturing is OSI, for Occupational Safety Standard of Excellence. Companies that have implemented a system to this standard are higher performing in terms of safety performance, so with less injuries. So I would say that working towards the industry building towards that goal is to try and broaden participation so more employers have health and safety management systems. And I believe some of this was also included in Graham's work. Those that had systems or consultation really had were seen as better performing. I'm not sure, but Graham, did you have some knowledge of that in the work that you've done?
Yes, so the phase 2 research, basically its starting point was looking at what the published research, so the academic research, has identified as the most effective practices for promoting a healthy and safe work environment, and then looked at whether they were present in the manufacturing sector in BC. First and foremost is, as Lisa has mentioned, the use of a robust occupational health and safety management system. And one of the ways that you can verify that is whether an employer has received something like the Occupational Safety Standard of Excellence, which the MSABC issues, CORE, the Certificate of Recognition from WorkSafe BC, the ISO 14000. Like there's a number of widely accepted standards for these management systems. The second piece, and I would say equally important, is a safety culture. And there's certainly evidence from the survey we did that those organizations that understand what a safety culture is and have really taken steps to embed a safety culture. So basically, safety is in everybody's mind every workday. They have higher levels of safety performance in terms of outcomes. So and that's knowledge that has been shared across the sector. So those are the two really big things. The third, of course, is training, and the training happens with the Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committees. A couple of years ago, WorkSafe BC increased the requirements in terms of hours of training for those committees. That's great. But also just, training happens at the beginning of a shift in sort of team huddles where they talk about safety issues even for a couple of minutes. I mean, that's training, that's reinforcing the importance of safety. And these are practices that are being used. The question is how extensively, and in particular, how can we support smaller companies to adopt these kinds of practices?
Well, and just looking to the future, together with my counterparts across Canada, are working to develop a national audit tool that includes, psychological safety and culture within the components. So there is certainly, looking to the future, more opportunities for us to have systematically include the right questions and the right framework, so that we help industry be successful at building programs and considering these elements to include within their occupational health and safety management system. So that is looking to the future to help bring industry in terms of that next level of performance.
Makes sense. And our last question is, beside the new accreditation and certification process, what other changes or elements can be introduced to improve the development of OHS professionals?
Lisa, that's a good one for you.
Well, in terms of of how can we, support the development of health and safety professionals. I know within our team itself, we are looking to help understand what key areas help the continuous learning for professionals. What are the emerging risks? So from a technical component, being aware of the change, certainly in manufacturing of things like robotics, nanotechnology, all of those emerging areas, and how can we help industry be successful, and how as a health and safety professional we can garner tools and education around those areas. As I mentioned, skills that are really, really important for employers include, understanding of business, so business acumen. How do we translate our knowledge of health and safety to different employee levels within organizations? Because it's really critical to the success of employers taking that information to fruition or to implementation. So those are, I know, some of the other pieces that are critically important. And as I mentioned, to be able to change and influence culture, understanding the psychological component in the processes that we have to help industry control the physical hazards, but also to really incorporate a psychological understanding in the solution. I think really important to impacting culture. So it's not simple, it's complex, but helping resource professionals or health and safety professionals understand how to do that, and how do we do that well, so that the outcome is what we expect, and bringing industry to again higher levels of performance, making it the safest place to live and work in Canada, which really is our goal in BC for manufacturing.
Thank you, Lisa and Graham. Did you want to add anything? Sorry.
Yes, I'd just like to very, very interesting question, and just to come at it from a slightly different angle. While, I mean, what we talked about is really trying to provide the most appropriate professional certification and training for people who are going to be in OHS positions. Equally important is how to ensure that at various levels and stages of the educational system, everybody is exposed to the importance of safety. Because, I mean, if you think about a safety culture, that means that safety is everybody's business. And so there is some interesting research that has come out of Europe showing that if you actually increase the exposure of apprentices during their apprenticeship training to safety knowledge and skills, and really greater emphasis on that, that they in fact carry that into their workplace and to contribute to making the workplace safer. So, thinking about it more broadly, there are some additional steps that could be taken.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for this extremely interesting webinar, very compelling. And thank you for informing us about the core competencies and capabilities that OHS professionals will likely require in the manufacturing sector, as well as strategies that have been developed to achieve a sustainable accreditation and certification process. So thank you so much to both of you for making the time to be with us today and for presenting the webinar.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Thank you, Yusra. Much
Thank
appreciated.
you. Yeah. Thank you to our audience as well for joining us and for your support.